these cards were the inspiration from the neo-Gnostic Christians called the Cathars, who were in southern France and ended up in northern Italy during the 13th and 14th century. They were in southern France in the 11th and 12th century, and certainly we were inspired by the Bogomils and the Gnostic Christians that came out of the East, so from Eastern Orthodox. So it's really interesting that one of the things that I've become much more familiar with over the last probably 12 months is just how much parallel there is between how these cards are laid out and their intent and Eastern Orthodoxy in Christianity, as opposed to sort of Catholic Christianity, which was in the West, and more so the reason why the Catholic Church were fairly intent on genociding the Cathar off the planet, and they successfully did that. And part of my whole thesis around this work was that at the time that the Cathar were about to be completely genocided, playing cards found their way into Western Europe. It was around 1370 that they found their way into Milan, and this is the same time that we see the first of the Marseille Tarot starting to appear over the next 20 years, and going then into the early 15th century. We see the Visconti family becoming, who were basically the rulers of Milan at this time, taking a very keen interest and were responsible, and the Sforza, who the Visconti and the Sforza families joined later on, and you often hear of the Sforza Tarot. So all of these were tied up with this same family during this period, during the 1300s and the 1400s. And so, as I say, my thesis is that these cards were how they salvaged the core teachings of the Cathar, who were these neo-Gnostic Christians that developed quite a huge following through southern France. It became such a threat to particularly southern France, to the Catholic Church, that Innocent III, the Pope at the time, basically commissioned a crusade against the Cathar in southern France, and they wiped out literally tens of thousands of Cathar through this region, and to escape that cleansing effect, some people ended up in the Pyrenees, up in the mountain ranges, and there were a couple of communities established there. But the reason that they ended up with the Visconti was that they'd been excommunicated by the church for a whole lot of different reasons, and so they sort of found safe haven within the Visconti controlled region of northern Italy. And so that's a little bit of history behind where this goes. What I brought to the cards was changing the way in which the cards are laid out. And unique to my work is the whole concept that the cards actually get their full depth of understanding by laying them out in a lemniscate shape. And the inspiration for this, as I was researching and contemplating, was the shape of the hats of the magician and the shape of the hats of strength or force, which was in the lemniscate shape. And they're kind of an unusual shaped hat, and I thought, oh, they're a bit weird. And I had just happened to be in Siena when the Il Palio was on in Siena, and they have a procession where the contradas, there's about 12 contradas, I think, in Siena, which are sort of family groups, if you, or a lot of them are very profession-based. They're nearly unions, you could call them, and they're the ones that race against each other in the Il Palio race, the horse race. It's quite famous. And here's one of the pages riding a horse, and he's wearing exactly that shaped hat. As if to say to me, yes, this hat's real. And it was part of the tradition of northern Italy at that particular time. And it was the shape of the hat that had me end up laying out the cards in this particular format. And as a result of that, it actually completely brought a whole new way of relating to the major arcana of the Marseille Tarot. The majors and the minors weren't together for a long time. They sort of came together probably somewhere around the middle of the 15th century. We start to see them sort of coming together, but up until then they were separate, and so we had 22 cards numbered 1 to 21, and one card called the Fool didn't have a number, and that's because the Fool is every man, every woman on the journey. She doesn't have a place. He's moving the whole time, whereas the rest of them actually had a place and had a sequence. So we're going to be talking about, this is where the House of God card is here, and we're going to be talking about it and why it's so significant. There's so much, as you can imagine, and all the rest of it. If you want to know anything about it, please go to Russell Sturgis on YouTube, and you'll see other talks that I've done, and you can hear more about it. You got to listen to some of that, and you found it worthwhile. Definitely, yeah. And I do have a book published. I see Michael has a copy, The Spiritual Roots of the Tarot. It's distributed by, and it was printed by Inner Traditions, which is owned by Simon & Schuster, and it's distributed internationally by Simon & Schuster. So you can go and order the book online through Simon & Schuster. Don't do it through Amazon. Amazon don't keep stocks of books that don't sell lots of books. So most other places do, but definitely Simon & Schuster, and your local bookshop will be able to get it for you if you want to get it. But that was released during COVID, which wasn't a good time for a book to be released, but it sort of gives you the whole explanation of what I'm about and what this is all about. However, what I'm about to tell you today is not in the book. This is like the next book. And we're taking this to another level today in terms of where this sits, and so just hang in there with me, and hopefully I've put together the side presentation in a way that serves us all. Okay. I'm going to call this the direct path. There's two ways of getting this all sorted. There's an indirect way, and for most of you, you've heard me talking about the indirect path for many years that have been coming to these talks, and that's what we saw in that previous this whole journey here, as it's laid out and as I've talked about and written about, is what is called the indirect path, and that has validity. It's just that it's a much harder way of doing this. And I think what I've found is an easier way of doing this. And what is this? Behind this dancer, this is what we call the sacred yoni, or the sacred vagina of the Divine Mother, which is part of infinite consciousness. And this is the place at which behind this dancer is infinite consciousness, and it comes into this world of illusion. What comes into this world of illusion? Infinite consciousness. Comes into this world of illusion via this window called the sacred yoni, and it's the point at which infinite consciousness gets to explore the whole notion of that which it isn't, and infinite consciousness is reconnected with itself through the sacred yoni, and we're part of that journey, we're part of that experience, and so we're going to be talking about that today as we go through this discussion. You can call infinite consciousness God, you can call it whatever you want. We're going to be talking about it as I am, as we get to later in our discussion, which is quite significant. Okay, any questions as we're going along, do ask. House of God card, it's an interesting card because what you've got is this tower with 3 windows. You've got the turret at the top, which looks like a crown. You've got 2 people falling out of the tower. You've got all these bubbles in the air. Now, what's really interesting is even within the images of the Marseille Tarot, a lot of times the element of fire in the earliest cards is going up. What was really interesting is that when we get to later cards, so the black and white card, which is pain, which was probably another 200 years after these cards, shows the fire coming down, and eventually when we get to the tower card, it's lightning striking the tower. And it changed the whole meaning by virtue of the direction of where the flames were going versus the notion of lightning. And so we're going to be talking about that as we go along, in that what we did was we lost the original intent of what this was about just by virtue of the fact that people turned those flames around and had them become something different. Suffering. Suffering is the experience of being in the world of illusion. The first card you encounter as you leave that lemnis gate is the magician. And what is a magician? He's an illusionist. He's a trickster. And he's saying, and he's telling us here really clearly that this was a wand, supposedly, his finger. Depending on who you read, a coin or an acorn, but a coin typically in his other hand, and on his table are cups and daggers. There's also dice, and there's a bag and a few other things. But those four, the swords or the daggers, the cups, the coin and the wand, represented power was the wand, coin was wealth, the sword was about victory, and the cups was about love. And basically what the magician is saying, you're about to encounter a world of illusion, because I'm the trickster, and these are an illusion. Wealth, power, love and success. They're not real. So we were told even before we were born, even before we took on human form, we were made aware that part of this journey that we were going into was a world based on illusion, that it was not real. The end of suffering is, as you will see a little bit later, is the point at which we go through the journey of the dark night of the soul. And we're going to be spending some time talking about the journey of the dark night of the soul and what that means in terms of it being quintessential to us being able to have lives where we no longer suffer. Can you imagine what that would be like?
Yes.
A life without suffering. Relationships that are joyful. Your mind not being caught up and going over and regurgitating stuff over and over. No fear. Imagine not having fear or worry. And of course right now we have an epidemic of all of those things in terms of the level of suffering that we're having globally. I believe that in the notion of critical mass, and by virtue of the fact that we're here today talking about this, we're actually part of the critical mass that's necessary to help shift what's happening globally right now, by virtue of the fact that we're entertaining the possibility of this as a way of life and as a way of being. And the impact energetically of that goes beyond these walls, because we're in space and there is no limit to space. Space is consciousness. And it's not limited in any way. And so by virtue of just us few people coming together today to do this, it's very profound in terms of our capacity to have an effect in what's going on in the world. So what makes us happy as human beings? Any thoughts? What makes us, not you personally, But as human beings generally, what are the things that make us happy?
Freedom.
Sorry?
Freedom.
Freedom? Yep.
Connection and meaning. Connection and meaning.
Connection and meaning.
I'll just cut to the chase. Love.
Love.
Purpose.
Purpose. Yeah. Now, this is a whole bunch of enlightened people talking about what happiness is. Tell me what the rest of the world think happiness is.
Chocolate.
Well,
We'll go with chocolate.
Love,
Yeah.
all the illusions.
All the illusions.
Yeah.
The majority of the world buys into the whole notion that they're happy if they've got control. They're happy if they've got somebody who loves them. They're happy if they've got money in the bank. They're happy if they're succeeding. I can tell you that most of the unhappiness that we have in the world is because those four things are absent. They're the things that are causing most people's suffering. And these were beautifully depicted in these cards. So the emperor represented the notion of power and control. This one's going to be a bit of a funny one to believe, but in fact the Pope represented wealth. And this is because of the time that we're dealing with. When we get to the end of the first millennium, the popes became intelligentsia, not monks. So pretty well up to the end of the first millennium, most of the popes were monks, and then they became lawyers and people that had degrees, had been to university and were highly educated. And what we started to see was that the focus became about power and wealth as it related. And what you'll see in these cards in their normal layout is that these guys are facing each other, the emperor and the pope. And we know that that was a major part of what was going on in Europe between the emperor from Germany and the Pope in Rome were in conflict with each other all the time. Now, the reason that we have this more oriented towards wealth is that the two people that are seen, the two monks that are seen in front of him, are the Franciscans. They're the poor, the spiritualists. They were the poor priests. They were the ones that, and so they were the contrast of the wealth of the church versus the grassroots fundamentalists who were about poverty. The Franciscans were about having no ownership of anything. Until after St. Francis died, then it changed. But up until then, it had been very much about that. And so the very fact that they were contrasted in this card was very, very significant in terms of where that sat. The third one is love. So this represents the three loves out of four. Now, in the Greek language, they had a lot of different words for love, but there were four core ones that they were associated. Obviously, eros, which is that romantic love that becomes sexual love, but it's you know, falling head over heels and that whole approach to love. You had storge, which was friendship love, and philia, which was family love. And basically what they were saying is that they're all special relationships and they're part of the illusion. None of those are real. And I know that that's hard when you're a mother or a father or because that's what we've spent our life engaging in and dealing with. But what they were saying is that those loves are an illusion. And in fact, all of these things get in the way of us connecting with what's the ultimate love. Does anyone know what the Greek word for the highest form of love is?
Agape.
Agape love. You know, which is divine love. Okay. And then finally, success. So here we see the chariot. And in Roman tradition, the chariot was the symbol of having won the battle. And this is quite significant, and if anybody's had the opportunity to go to Siena and see the horse race, the Il Palio, the chariot, and it's a square-shaped chariot like this, still drawn with 2 to 4 horses, and that's part of the tradition of the Il Palio, which is about the victors. The horse race was an interesting one, because what would happen was when a city was in conflict with another city and they had won the battle, they would have the victory parade, and they would have a horse race with the knights to see who was the fastest, which was called the Il Palio. And the Il Palio means the flag, and it meant that if you won the race, you could carry the flag at the front of the procession as a knight, and then whoever the general was would be riding the chariot. And so it was about success, it was about having won the battle. Oftentimes though, the victor would have another man in there, and some of you have read my book, you'll know, but anyone want to hazard a guess what the other guy was saying to this guy while he's in the chariot?
You're awesome.
The opposite, he's going, stay humble, stay humble, stay humble. Because basically the lack of humility originally was seen as the highest sin. And so they were literally being told to stay humble during this particular... But here we have somebody that there's no humility here. He's lost that. It's all about success, and I'm at the top of the pecking order. So these become the things that in the world of illusion make us happy. You all were telling us about the things that were based on spiritual values, which is a whole different world in terms of that. But the rest of the world that we deal with, these are the things this is what wakes them up at 2 o'clock in the morning. This is what causes them to be angry. And I have to tell you that even for us, in all the work that we've done, I'm sure we still have moments where these things impact on us. They still sneak in, and all of a sudden we find ourselves discombobulated. I love that word. We find ourselves out of stillness. We've just got angry at our partner, at our children, the neighbour. We've got upset because we lost a contract, or somebody said something about us in our work that's impacted on our success in our business. We're dealing with financial issues. This is a big one right now. Scarcity right now. The cost of living has risen so much right now, making living so much more difficult for people. And then powerlessness and victimhood. We've got a major issue in our world where, having been a white male-dominated society for so many years, so many people had been victimised, and there's been a lot of suffering and pain, both in terms of gender, race, ability, all sorts of things that's created great divides and caused a lot of issues around powerlessness and victimhood and the need. And once again, even for us, we may still have narratives. And what I will tell you is a big part of the work that I do when I work with clients. We don't spend 2 years working with clients anymore. Well, we do if that's what they want, but a big part of our work is helping people identify their childhood narrative, their programming. And I can tell you that the way that these things play out in your life are the symptoms of your childhood narrative. Which is why it's a waste of time trying to actually fix any of these. Most of you are involved in natural therapies. Yes, you help give relief to the symptoms, but you look to treat the cause. We live in a world where most people are focusing on trying to treat the symptoms. It's not sustainable. People are going to keep on coming back and having the same problems if you're not treating the cause. And what these guys were doing by virtue of this layout of cards is that they were giving us an understanding of how to treat the cause of our suffering. Any questions? Haven't lost anybody? Cool. So what causes our suffering? So these are the things that we suffer about. What causes it, the suffering?
Our attachment.
Our attachment, or our lack of, evidenced by our attachment. And this is highlighted by three really dramatic sort of characters who now enter the scene in the journey. The first one is natural justice, the justice card. Natural justice, nobody's sitting there punishing you when you're experiencing natural justice. When I lived in Italy, there was a lovely big donut thing that they had there that was just huge, with full of cream and jam and that, and its name was Bumba, which means big bottom. It's fabulous. But you eat too many of those and natural justice is going to give you a big bottom. You see, nobody's punishing you if you keep on eating those. It's the natural consequence. And of course, you know, we're living in a world right now where there's a whole lot of consequences around natural justice, around people living unsustainably. And all of a sudden they're suffering. Not because anyone's punishing. It's not the government that's punished them. It's natural justice by virtue of the fact that they've created a lifestyle that's been responsible for creating what they perceive as being sort of the quality of life. That when things change all of a sudden, The next one, aging. Anybody's values being challenged by the impact of aging? As you start to lose mobility, as you start to deal with health issues, as you start to not become as mobile as what you did before, and of course the prospect of dying. Because, you know, when you're dealing with the prospect of death, how important are your possessions? When you lose the mobility and the freedom of being able to, you know, my mum lost her licence because of her age and lost her freedom because of the impact of ageing, and that was suffering for her, that she didn't have that freedom. That's a pretty simple example, but you've all had moments of experiencing changes or challenges in your experiences because of the impact of aging and the prospect of death. And then the third one, anyone know what the third one is? Wheel of Fortune. Misfortune. Bad luck. These three things basically cause our suffering, because what they do is they take away wealth, power, love and success. Here's what's interesting is that the creators of the cards are saying this was knitted into the fabric of the human experience. What's interesting is that these cards don't exist in the other side of the journey. It's only in the world of illusion. When you move into a place of total inner peace, where your values are aligned with sustainable values, spiritual values, none of this impacts on you. It doesn't take you out of your peace. Is that possible? Yeah. It is. But we need to know how to do that in terms of being able to have it be sustainable. And that's the problem that those of us on the spiritual journey face, that have been doing it for some time, and I work with a lot of people who have been working with spiritual work for a long time, and they're still having arguments with their partner and issues around finances and those things that are still causing them to be discombobulated in spite of years of doing spiritual work. And it's only because these guys in one form or another have stepped in. And that's their role, is to wake you up to the illusion. It's part of the fabric of the journey. So, what are our options? So, what happens is we go through the world of illusion. We're born. We have issues around power and issues around wealth and love and success. They're the things that we go through. And then we've got justice, time and chance. And we come to the crossroad. If you remember that symbol that I had, and we're at the crossroad. And so we have some different options. The first one is the world of illusion. You can go back and do it all again. So this is the person that gets the new girlfriend and gets the sports car and moves to a hipper suburb or whatever they do, and they try to recreate the world of illusion in a whole different format to what they had before. Now, not everybody has the energy to do that. And so what's the other way that people stay in the world of illusion? Yeah, the addictions. So what they're going to do is they're going to find things to distract them from their suffering. So addictions is the big one, and aversions is another, but they're into exercise. Imagine that. But that can be an addiction for some people. Sex, gambling, drugs, alcohol. New age, shit and glitter. Excuse the French. Even that. People can get caught up in that as an addiction. But what happens is we just mark time. We actually don't go anywhere. So where that comes around in that full circle, we actually come to the crossroads. That person stays where the Wheel of Fortune is, and they're just sitting there marking time. The other option is death, suicide. I just heard on the radio today, in Australia, right at the moment, the percentage of men who will commit suicide compared to women is 3 times higher in Australia at the moment. But suicide is one of the options that people say, I've had enough, can't do it anymore. But we also have slow suicide, which we see as being medically, inconvenient, but it's acceptable. People with diabetes who don't do anything about changing their diet or their lifestyle in order to manage their diabetes, who keep on drinking soft drinks and doing those things. That's slow suicide. It's still suicide. It's just a slow version of it. But that's one of the other options that we have. The third one, the dark night of the soul. We don't want to go there. That's a place we don't want to go. Why? Because for most of us, we don't even know it exists. For the biggest majority of the world, they don't know that there's another place to go. And even if they found out, what's the issue? There's nobody there to take them through it. We don't have enough people in our world who understand the journey of the dark night to walk other people through it. That's probably our biggest issue right now, is that we don't have enough people who know how to engage the dark night, who have been through it, who have experienced it, own it, understand it, and can walk with somebody on that journey through that. More than ever, we need people who know how to walk people really clearly through the dark night of the soul, who understand all the elements of what that's about. And we're going to talk about some of this because most of you will have some understanding of it, but hopefully we can give it a little bit of structure for you as we're going through here so that it has a little bit more understanding of how you can use it to make a difference in the world. Any questions about these guys here?
Can you give us in a nutshell version of the dark night of the soul?
Well, that's what we're going to do now. We're going to talk about the dark night. So we'll wait for these guys to come back. Quick break. Here's what I will say while we're waiting for them to come back. There's two dark night experiences. There's one called the dark night of the senses and another one called the dark night of the soul. The dark night of the senses is when you go through the experience of loss and you decide that you want to get back into the game. And so you find the courage and the strength to get back in, or you go onto medication long enough to recover and you get back into the world of illusion. So in other words, what happens is people went, you know, and I've had this many times, oh, I've been through the dark night of the soul. Oh yeah, and what did that look like? Oh, I was in so much pain. It just hurt so much. And then where did you go? Oh, well, I got back on my horse and I was able to get back into life again. That's not a dark night of the soul. That's a dark night of the senses. And people think that because they've gone through a painful experience, and sometimes exquisitely painful, they think that that's the dark night of the soul. That's a dark night of the senses. Because they will be back in the world of illusion. Okay? The world of illusion. So this is the world of illusion, this part of it here. We've talked about, here we see. So this is the spirit world, these two cards here, by the way, before we're born. Here's mother, here's the empress, she's the mother giving birth to us. And then we've got the father, the emperor, the pope, the lovers, the chariot, justice, time and chance. So all of those things are laid out in the world of illusion, really clearly. Here we have the magician. And this is in the spirit world, and he says, well, you've been around so many times, and in fact, you can see there that the Popess has the book open, the book of life open, and she's saying, well, you've done all of this, and there's these things that you're here to get sorted. And so obviously these guys believe in reincarnation, and the idea that you're going to come back and keep on working through this stuff, okay? And so, and he's just letting you know what you're going to be dealing with. If you've forgotten, this is what the world of illusion includes. And then she's saying, and then there's a veil. There's a veil between her and the world of illusion. Do you know what that veil is in the human body? Fascia. The veil is fascia. The thicker the fascia, the more separate or distanced you are from the divine, infinite consciousness. The looser and more fluid your fascia, the more you are in connection. And I actually call it the veil between your soul being and your human being.
So you need to get more massages.
Or bone therapy. The problem with massage, and I'm a massage therapist. No, this is an important distinction, because you think, yes, have more massage. But because fascia responds to stimulation of what's called piezoelectricity in the GAGs and the PGs, the glycosaminoglycogens and the proteoglycans, what happens is, if you do massage, you actually overstimulate the sugar substrates that create the piezoelectricity, and it washes out the piezoelectricity, and you stop getting... The piezoelectricity is what actually attracts the water into the fibres. And if it's overstimulated, it washes out the piezoelectricity, and it can't hold the water in the GAGs and the sugar substrates. And you lose the effect of the fluid effect. And I know that intimately because I've been involved in both for many, many years. Massage overstimulates the piezoelectricity in the fascia. So too long a massage, too heavy a massage. How many people have had bone therapy before? It's superficial, non-invasive. It almost feels like they're doing nothing. Let me tell you what they're doing is really profound. And in fact, we incorporate bone therapy into our work when we're mentoring people. So what I would experience in my clinic, and I'll give you an idea of my professional background. I was in Dalby, town of 10,000 people, that's my hometown. Went back to Dalby, opened a practice there. When I sold my practice, I had 5,500 clients on record, and I was treating 125 people a week doing bone therapy, which you don't hear many practices of that magnitude. I'd be doing bone on people and they'd come back in after their second treatment and they'd go, well, I've done it. I go, what have you done? Quit my job, moving house, left my partner. Why? Why were they making these drastic decisions? Because now they were listening to their soul, which they had been cut off from with their glued fascia. They could hear what the soul wanted for the first times in their lives. And all of a sudden, they would make a soul choice, which was, I've had enough of this relationship, this job, this house. We would create windows of opportunity. Unfortunately, it isn't enough to do bone to have sustainable windows in terms of it staying open. That's why the mentoring work that we do, shifting consciousness, brings about those sustainable changes. But it's certainly really valuable in helping to create those changes. And so we incorporate bone therapy, if people are able to get it, into the work that we do when we're working with people for that very reason. So here we see the veil. And here's where the veil is thickest, is after we've got to the point of going through the 4 illusions, and he's got a canopy over the top of his chariot, and this canopy is so thick that he's now cut off from God completely. He's at the most significant place of separation from infinite consciousness at this particular point. And something has to intervene, which is the role of justice, time and chance.
Sorry, which card was that? Canopy?
Over the top of the chariot. He's got over the victory chariot. He's got and it's a very dense canopy over the top. A baldachin over the top. Okay. So the first thing that we do is we adopt ways to ignore the suffering. Okay, we talked about that. The second thing that we do is we find better ways to avoid our suffering. And that's what we do as human beings. That's our go-to. And of course, what happens, and the reason I have this, and the reason that they have a Wheel of Fortune, is that if you have a look, the wheel just keeps on going round and round. But I want you to have a look at, for a moment, what's the difference between the Wheel of Fortune shown here and the one shown up here? There's 2 significant differences.
The Empress?
So this only has 3 people on it, and this one's got 4, and this one's going anti-clockwise, and this one is going clockwise. Now the Catholic Church would have said that this was evil because Widdershins was the feminine. It was going left, and that was evil. You didn't do anything to the left, it was evil. And so it was all this way. They had a name, and the guy at the top says, I reign. This one here coming up this side says, I will reign. And this one here says, I have reigned. So in other words, that's what happens in the Wheel of Fortune, and the one down the bottom says, I have no kingdom. So in other words, what this says is you're going to keep on going through this cycle of events. I will reign, I have no kingdom. I will reign, I reign. And have you been through that cycle a couple of times in your own life? In terms of having those things go on? There's no guy at the bottom here, which is suggesting what? If that says I have no kingdom, if he's not there, what does that mean? There is a kingdom. The fact that he's not there says, because his name is, I have no kingdom. And so what it's saying is, if you go widdershins, in other words, instead of going this way, if you go the opposite way, there's a kingdom. And of course what happens is when you come around, you actually, when you go widdershins, you come around like this, on this side. And so basically what this card is saying is, you know, you've got to change direction in terms of what you're doing. And that's where the dark night of the soul enters. And so we talked about these elements here in terms of death, and which was this one up here. And the Black Plague had such a big impact on Europe, and the Dance of Death was something that literally they would carry out ritual dances, and you can still go. There's a couple of places in Europe that still have them, one in France and one in Italy, where they actually do, people dress up like skeletons and they do the Dance of Death, and it was about this idea that you can't escape it. In other words, it doesn't matter whether you're an emperor or an empress, you're still going to have to confront death. And so that's one of the options. Hi, Liz. So that's one of the options in terms of what could happen based on what we were just looking at. I just thought it was such a really graphic image. And but it's an option that people choose. Okay.
What's the symbolic significance of that sphere with the cross on top? Not necessarily in this picture, but just generally that symbolism is quite...
You grab my book, have a look at it afterwards, and there's a lovely description of it all in there. It's quite significant, actually. The dark night of the soul. Now, the dark night of the soul, it's called force or strength. So she has two elements to her that are really important here, because you need these to encounter the dark night of the soul. One is courage. You're going to need the sort of courage it would take for a refined woman, this is a refined woman, to actually be in the same space as a lion and hold open its mouth. That's the sort of courage you're going to need to go through this journey. You've got to be hurting a lot to want to do that. And sometimes we keep on going around that clockwise wheel to the point where it hurts so much we'll go, I'll do anything. Suicide is one of those options, but there is another option, which is what we're talking about now. Now here's what's interesting, is the magician and the stuff that he's involved in is responsible for suffering, because it's all part of the illusion. And he has a table that has 3 legs, and I've highlighted those, which says that the magician literally has the ability to cause suffering on 3 legs of the journey. 1, 2, 3. The missing leg of the table says that none of his stuff has anything to do with the 4th leg. So it's no coincidence that his table only has 3 legs, because it's saying he only can impact. So even in the dark night of the soul, that part of the journey, we can still experience suffering. Albeit, we now have context for it. And that's the difference. So this bottom circle here, suffering can be and is typically experienced in this part of the journey. So this is the Hanged Man, the Death card, Temperance, and the Devil card. These are very significant and essential parts of the journey through the dark night of the soul. The Hanged Man. So if you have a look at his frame, it's gone through a process of being pruned. There's a pruning, and the pruning is representative of the effect that justice, time and chance have had in his life. They've pruned things that he was attached to. So that's what that's symbolising. And pruning is a forced loss. And so in other words, somebody else has come along. You don't cut your own leaves off. Somebody else has come along. So we've experienced forced loss, which is causing our suffering. Like most of us, he's still attached to the stuff. And with this leg being pointed back in terms of where it fits in the symbol of things, he's still pointing back to the world of illusion. So he's in this place where he's lost all the things that were important to him. There's been a pruning, a stripping away, but he's still connected. He's still attached. And his leg's pointing back saying, I still... And what do we relate that to? Grief. What we suffer from the most here is grief, loss. The point at which we're still attached. Grief is our attachment. Does grief hurt? Hell yeah. Absolutely it does. And so there's still suffering at this point. And in fact, our greatest suffering in this part of the journey will be grief. Because of the fact that it's all been taken away. You're left with nothing. So part one of the healing. Be the observer. So, be the observer of the fact that we use our mind and our perceptions, inspired by our desires, to engage the world through those elements. And what you have to first do is to become the observer. And the things that we're observing is the fact that these three guys have come in. We're looking at the facts of what has been going on in our life. We observe the facts of what interfered with those things in our life. And we observe the grief that we're experiencing. And this was represented by this card here, which is called the death card. In fact, not all of them had the name on the bottom of it. And so you sever your attachment. So now you're beginning to make the choice to let go. It's not being forced on you by becoming the observer. What's he doing? He's looking. He's being the observer. I've got a great way to become an observer. I have a new business card that I give out cheekily sometimes, and my expertise is I'm a punctuation expert. And what does that mean? I teach people to use full stops. To be the observer, you have to use full stops and not commas. What we do is we have a situation. I have a flat tyre. Now, you have a choice. You can either put a full stop there, or you can put a comma. Bloody hell! And, blah, 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 blah. And off we go with our narrative. Our sense of the world keeps on dicking on me from a great height. And we get upset and angry, frustrated, remorseful. The minute you put a comma in, it's then about your narrative. You've stopped being the observer, you're now manifesting your narrative again. So what you're doing in this place here is We sever our attachment to grief by becoming the observer. That is the purpose of mourning. This card these represent the Beatitudes. This is blessed are the poor in spirit, for those of you who have a Christian tradition. For theirs is the kingdom of God. Then this one is blessed are those that mourn. The process of mourning is externalizing your grief so it can be observed. That's what mourning is. It's a ritual of externalizing grief. When it's externalized, then you can see it. But while it's internal, it can't be managed. It still consumes you. And so by externalizing, you're able to observe. So what are we observing? Wealth, power, love and success. I'm looking at my relationships. You know, what are the facts around your relationship? Sometimes we have argy-bargy moments. Full stop. You don't put a comma in there and go, but it's his fault or her fault or whatever. You don't go anywhere else with it. You just state the facts. When we have those moments, I feel overwhelmed, frustrated, full stop. All you're doing is stating the facts. An interesting thing happens when you become the observer. Blessed are those that mourn, for they will be comforted. Come beside, nearby or with, and fought to strengthen, comfort. That's what it literally means, which means to be comforted requires a comforter. But here's an interesting thing that happens in this place, is that when you step into being the observer, there are no thoughts. There are no perceptions. There are no desires. All there is peace. The observer doesn't feel anything. The observer doesn't think anything. All it's doing is stating facts. Full stop. The minute you take the comma out, there's no suffering. The minute you replace the comma with a full stop, in that moment, while you're staying the observer, you're in comfort. You're not experiencing anything because you've stepped back from the experience and you've become the witness of what's happening. Does that make sense? So at that point, when we're able to be the observer and we're not caught up in it, now we move into the next one, which is to be the listener. Come on. Doesn't want to go there. Is there something I haven't said?
Full stop.
But the Comforter, which is the Holy Spirit of wisdom, shall teach you all things. So in fact, the Comforter is Holy Spirit. The point at which you start to use full stops you become the student. You're able to listen. And when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And Holy Spirit of wisdom could be a tree, a wave in the ocean, a song, could be anything that speaks to you not through your head but through your heart. And it will be accompanied by stillness. In the most profound and amazing way, it will be reinforced with the sensation of love, unconditional love, and inner peace. What I can tell you is, in that place, you are now experiencing yourself as a soul being, no longer a human being. In that moment, you are now that part of you which is a part of infinite consciousness, which is your soul being. And it only knows one thing: love, joy, peace, stillness, because that's all it is. And all of a sudden, that's what you begin to experience in this place. Just because you've put in a full stop. That's how easy it is. It's literally that easy. Start using more full stops. Get rid of the commas. When the student's ready, the teacher appears. And here's what I can tell you, is that in the journey of the dark night, the experience of the teacher is accompanied by love, peace and joy. That's how you know that this is the right teacher. Because you will have those sensations, those experiences of what it is that's going on in those moments. This isn't a harsh teacher. There's no sort of having to experience that which you aren't in order to experience that which you are in this place. Now you're in the place where you get to experience. And the cup has been emptied and the water's being poured in, and you're being refilled with the water of life, which was significant in the Christian tradition. Part 3, be the knower. Who would have thought that the Devil card? Knowledge and understanding are essential in order to be aware. As a human being, we're easily attached to the things that make us happy. Being aware, you are that which knows you are thinking and knows you are desiring. Have a look at the hands of the devil. His right hand is open and is in the air. Air classically represents mind, thinking. And he's saying you have no attachment to thought, which is one of the fundamental ways in which we stay locked into who we are as a human being. And then on the other side, this doesn't look like it, but I can tell you that there's enough research to justify my rationale for it. That's a flaming sword. It was the symbol of the flaming sword. And it's first of all the element of fire. And fire relates to spirit. And spirit is what as a state of human consciousness? I'll give you a hint. Team spirit. It's what we desire, what drives us. Yeah, no, more about being driven. Okay, we have spiritual, which gives us another. But in terms of spirit, when you think of team spirit, that's what drives you. You want to succeed. Okay. And so this is about letting go of what you desire. Spirit. Where does what our desire come from, by the way? Yes, it is our thinking, but what inspires that thinking? Our 7-year-old. Our inner 7-year-old is dictating everything that we desire as an adult. So in the Christian tradition and Jewish and a whole lot of the others, in the Old Testament story, Adam and Eve are kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and if you remember the scripture, it says, and God put cherubim and a flaming sword at the eastern gate. Right now, we're dealing with the cherubim. The cherubim, according to Ezekiel, was an angel with 4 faces. The face of a bull, a lion, an eagle and an angel. What did we see in the 4 corners of the world card with the sacred yoni in it? A bull, a lion, an eagle and an angel. They represent, the bull represents matter, physical, the element of cold. The angel represents air, he's in the air, represents the mind and thinking. The lion is the symbol for spirit and fire, and the eagle is the representation of emotion and water, classically. And so what we're doing is recalibrating these 4 things here and immediately after the Tower card or the House of God card. So here's the first 2 recalibrations. Let go of your thinking and let go of what you desire. But how you let go of what you desire is you have to sacrifice the 7-year-old. This is the Abrahamic test. This is Abraham being told to go and sacrifice his son. Well, he wasn't sacrificing his son. What he was being asked to do was to sacrifice his attachment to his son, because Abraham had a whole issue around parent-child relationship because he'd been abandoned by his own father. If you've read any of the biblical stories, he had a major hang-up about children. We even have some wars happening in the Middle East right now that are based on Abraham's children, Ishmael and Isaac. Literally, if you read anything of the biblical history, what's happening right now in Israel is because Abraham had 2 sons. He actually had a lot of sons after he got his shit sorted. But Ishmael and Isaac is where we're dealing with all the issues that are going on right now in terms of the history. So God says, I want you to go and sacrifice Isaac. He needs to know that his love of God is more important than his love of his wound of being the abandoned child, which he was solving and resolving by virtue of his connection with his own son. That's what was going on there. We each have to sacrifice our 7-year-old. You've got to know what your 7-year-old is. Here's a cheeky advertisement. That's what I do, is I help people identify their 7-year-old. But you've got to know what that is in order to stop the 7-year-old interfering with or having you get caught up in knowledge and desire, or the mind and desire. You've got to let those go. And it's another dark night experience. Letting go of the narrative of the 7-year-olds, because sometimes as we go through and identify what that narrative is, we realise that there's a lot of pain there in our childhood. In all sorts of different forms. I had the most amazing childhood. I really did. I had loving parents. I was raised in a loving home. I got a couple of floggings throughout my life, but I'm talking like maybe 2, you know. And that was it. I had an amazing childhood, but don't need to go into the detail. I was on the periphery. Even within my own family, I sat on the perimeter, and my whole life, look at what I do now, is on the perimeter. I'm not in the middle of it, I'm on the perimeter. And in fact, our narrative is the gift. I want to say this, and I want you to hear what I'm saying. Our narrative, our 7-year-old narrative, is the gift we gave ourselves to serve humanity. Our 7-year-old child narrative is the gift we gave ourselves to serve humanity. You've just got to find what the gift is. And you've got to be able to convert the narrative in order to do that. That's a fundamental part of what's happening here. That's the only way, by letting go. We're letting go of our desires and attachments to appetite, sexual things, gender, role, and all those things that define us in the world. This is the point at which we're saying, okay, I'm now stepping back from this. By becoming the observer and by becoming the listener. And here's what happens is in this place, when we have that ability to step back, now we become the knower of our awareness. In other words, we are aware that we are aware. So this is like the next level. It's one thing to be the observer, to be aware. It's another thing to know that you're aware. And the only way that you can do that is to fully embrace having let go of your mind and your desires, your thoughts and your desires. Can you imagine a life without thoughts and desires? I live in the mountains, as you know, and now more than ever my life is filled with not just minutes but hours in a day where there's no thoughts and desires. I'm building what I call a raking meditation path up through the back half acre of my property, and what I do 2 or 3 times a week is I take my rake, and there's so many trees in my land that I end up with so many leaves on my walking path, and I just rake my walking path, and I'm just totally observant and present to the soil, the sound. I don't do anything with it, I don't have it mean anything, I just listen. And I walk up my path and I rake it. I sit on my balcony first thing in the morning and I go out with a cup of tea or whatever. And for the first 3/4 of an hour of my day, I just sit and listen to the sound of the wind through the leaves and the birds. And I have 2 bird baths on that side of the house, and I watch little birds and big birds come in and have a bath and a drink. I don't go anywhere with it. I just sit and watch. And more of my life is becoming less and less about my desires and my thoughts. I have to tell you, putting this presentation together and the slide presentation was really hard work. What I could normally do in about a day, maybe in a day and a half, this took me about 4 days to do, because I really struggled to get my mind to do it because of where I've gone with what I'm doing now in terms of how I'm living my life. I have thoughts and desires, but I'm not my thoughts and desires. And this is important. I am that which knows my thoughts and desires. Do you know, we constantly use the words I am, but we never pay attention to that. What we focus on is the word that comes after it. So here's a little challenge I want to throw out to you. Next time you say I am, stop. Become the observer of what you've said, and then step back and be the observer of the observer, and focus on just the 2 words, I am. Not the words that follow it. Shift your attention to just observing the words. Because you see, when you become that which knows what you're aware of, at that point you are I am. In that moment there, when you become the knower of the knowledge, that which knows of what you're aware, in that moment you are fully connected with divine consciousness. Allow yourself to put as much energy into basking in the experience of I am as you have done in whatever words have followed. And in fact, if you want the ultimate full stop, I am full stop. Don't put a comma in there. Any questions about what I'm saying? Because it's so simple. But this is the direct path to really connecting with your highest source as a way of life. It doesn't require meditation. It doesn't require a whole lot of the practices that we've been learning and focusing on. It just requires you to use full stops.
And rake.
And a rake. In my case, it needs a rake.
What's the significance of age 7? Why is that so significant?
That's where the brain changes from the point of programming to self-choice. So we can actually become cognitively responsible for our choices from age 8. But up until then, it's just we're so full of neural pathways in the brain. I mean, just major neural pathways absorbing, and then around age 7 that stops and it starts to change, and then we're in a position where we can actually make choices between right or wrong, good or bad, etc., etc. But up until then, pretty well not. Now, it does vary. They're saying now as early as 5 they think that that's really starting to kick in now.
When the teeth fall, is that what, like Steiner?
I don't know. Maybe. You know, I respect Steiner's teaching, so quite possibly, yeah. But there's certainly, scientifically, they've now looked at the way in which the brain changes its formulation of neural pathway and neurotransmitters. It's so absorbative during those first several years and just completely changes to just about being nothing comparatively. Mm.
So are your desires, like until, 5 to 7, your 5-year-old, your thoughts are that you're just acting. Are there desires that are formed then? Or do desires get formed at 7?
No, they're getting formed all through that time there. Okay. Absolutely. They're watching mum and dad and the society they live in, and that's where it's all coming from. I've got 2 granddaughters, and it's been a spectacular journey being a granddad, watching the granddaughters mimic their parents. It's like, oh my God. And you just realise just how much that programming's going on, And I'm sorry to say that because we live in a world where the majority of the people who are in the first 7 years of a child's life, it's mum. It's changing now, but up until now it's been mum. And mum has been the one there modelling how to be a human being. A little bit of dad, but primarily mum. Huge responsibility. Part 4. Be the happiness. The places of happiness sought by the voice of your human being. I love this image, it's one that we have in our workbook of this little 7-year-old informing the adult, is all around wealth, power, love and success. The intrinsic state of happiness. Now, I want you to hear those words. What does intrinsic mean? It's fundamental, underlying. The fact is, you are intrinsically happy. That is who you are in your soul being. Just that it's been completely overshadowed by thoughts, perceptions and desires. And out of that, we've got all of these clouds of despair and pain and suffering that have covered up the blue sky of joy and happiness. That is who we are in our soul being. And so that what happens here is the intrinsic state of happiness as revealed by the still small voice of your soul being. And this is what's happening here, is that in the house of God as a result of the impact of these guys here. What is it? Being the observer. Where do we go to next?
Teacher.
Being the student or listener, being the listener, and being...
Letting go, being the observer.
Being aware that you're aware.
Being aware that you're aware. Being the knower. Okay, that's knowledge at that point. That's when you know that you know in that place. At that point there, this isn't a place of sacrifice. This isn't a place, once upon a time, I said this is the point where, you've got to go through this process where it's going to be hard. It's not hard. This is the point. It falls off you now. Because all of your focus is being directed towards pure light. At this point here, this piece of sun that we see in the corner is the limited understanding that we have at this point of divine consciousness. But we know that this is what we want to put all of our energy, all of our desire into, is now divine consciousness.
Is it almost like your spirit is being freed from the illusions of material?
Absolutely.
Back into the sun.
And the bubbles, been working with the head of the Buddhist community in Croatia, which is really interesting, going through my work. And he said bubbles in their tradition represent moving into higher consciousness. It's a symbol of...
Well, maybe evaporating water. Yeah.
Just an observation. I've seen the way that the artist has done the top of the tower is very similar to the sun. As if to say,
yes,
it's the reflection of the sun, but it's not the sun.
No, that's right. And that's what we end up getting with the star card and the moon card, because in fact they're not the sun, they're just showing reflections of it as we're going through. So it's part of which we'll talk about in just a minute. Yeah. But nice observation. Yeah. So these represent, the tower represents wealth, power, success, and these are special relationships, love. In other words, from this point on, those things have no importance in your life anymore. But it's not as a result of sacrifice. This isn't a sacrifice. If it's a sacrifice, you're not ready. It's nearly like you just walk off and leave it behind you, because you are so fully immersed now in being that which is the observer, that which is constantly being inspired by the still small voice, as opposed to the small voice of the 7-year-old, and the I amness that you're now connecting with, being the knower of that of which you're aware. How are we going? Everyone going okay? Just checking in. Part 5, being love. And so now we look at the hands again, and this is where we had the mind, or the element of air and fire. Now we have the two elements of earth and water being addressed. And this relates to the Beatitude, blessed are the merciful. And so what happens is we now start to adopt a consciousness of mercy. In the Catholic tradition, they talked about spiritual works of mercy and corporal works of mercy. So Jesus, for example, taught corporal works of mercy: feed the hungry, visit the sick, clothe the naked. And so in other words, social justice. What happens now is that you become much more aware, not just of you, but of those around you. You see, you will only act with social justice if you can see where there's a need. People walk past people sitting there begging all day long and will never give them anything. They just don't see them. Choose to ignore them. We have lots of places where we can be involved in social justice in our world, particularly with what's going on in the world now. And then the other one was spiritual works of mercy, which is forgiveness. This is now about adopting a life of forgiveness of others and forgiveness of self. If any of you are interested, take my card. In the Centre for Western Mindfulness, this card's about my own business, but at the Centre for Western Mindfulness, we've got a lovely series of blogs on forgiveness. I did a 8 month, one each month last year on forgiveness. And it's a combination of a sort of a 1 page, 1.5 page written text and a 10 to 15 minute video. And it really looks at all the different dimensions of forgiveness, which is worthwhile considering. But what you need to understand is that this is now, once again, shifting how we're using our energy, physically and emotionally. The water representing emotion, the earth representing physical. And now it's about service. Now we're starting to act in a loving way in the world. At this particular point here.
Why are her hands white and face white?
He's got white. It's funny. It's inconsistent throughout the cards. I still haven't got a sort of a real grasp on that. But when we come to this place here, the next part of the love journey is blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. This card here represented the birth of Christ consciousness, or Jesus. So the crayfish, traditionally in the constellation of Cancer, right in the centre of it has a star constellation called Praspe, which means the crib or the manger. And so this represented the point at which we align with Christ consciousness. For they shall see God. Here's what happens at this point. You see God everywhere. In every human being, in every animal, in every plant, and even in your own reflection in the mirror. At this point here, when you reach this place of purity in heart, at this point, all you see is God reflected in everything. You see the I am in every other human being. Which means this. It means that you love them, but you don't have to like what they do. You love them because you understand who they are, at their core, at the essence of who they are. But that doesn't mean to say that you have to agree with what they've done. But what happens is we get caught up in, once again, they are, what we should do is put a full stop in there, because they are is just the inversion of I am in terms of where that is. But what we do is they are, and then off we go. And it isn't that, you know, the things that people do sometimes aren't bad, but it's how we relate then to it. It's the anger that we feel, it's the frustration, it's the resentment, it's what we feel in those moments that then takes us out of remembering who they are. That's a tough one. But where does that take us to? Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. And this is the point of non-duality. This is the point where you recognise. So here's what I want you to do, is just take a moment and look around you at everybody else in this space and just stop and consider that we all are I am. Each one of us here is I am. That's who we are. Every person we meet on the street is I am. We've got to start using more full stops and making it simpler. Here's what's interesting about these three images. She can see the tree of life across the river from where she's at as she's starting to do this. Where's the tree of life? In the kingdom of heaven. If you remember, Adam and Eve were told about the trees in the Garden of Eden. They said, well, we don't want you eating of this tree, which is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And what did they do? They partook of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But now, if you go back and have a look at that, if you remember, there was another tree behind her. That's the tree of knowledge of good and evil. She's moved on now, and she can see this in the foreground. She knows that she's heading towards heaven because it's on the hill. The holy city. This is the holy city, the New Jerusalem. The bride, as if being prepared for the bridegroom. What is it the analogy of? This is getting ready to re-enter the sacred yoni. In the classical tradition, there's one building on the left and one on the right. The one on the right is all closed up. This one's not as evident, but in a lot of other ones you'll see there's a door and that, and it's not sealed on top. It's open with a turret, and it's like going to the left, Widdershin, you're going to the New Jerusalem. You're going to the entrance back into where I am exists. Not that it doesn't exist here, but that's its pure source of consciousness. And then finally, the wall. I only just found this out. This is really interesting. This is paradise. Para means to be beside or near. And dice means wall, or to build a wall. Paradise literally means to be near the wall. This is the wall of the kingdom of heaven. This is the wall of the rose garden, as it would often be called. So what we get out of these three cards is you are now at the place where you're about to enter the presence of God, the I am, infinite consciousness. And part 6, I am that I am. When you perceive that the two are one, that the outer is the same as the inner, that which is above is the same as that which is below, that the male and the female are one and the same, then you will enter the kingdom of God. When you come to the point of non-duality, all there is I am. And you turn up and relate to the world in that way, then you're about to enter into, he, it's actually an androgynous figure, has got the robe of righteousness and is about to enter into the kingdom of heaven. That was from the Gospel of Thomas, verse 22. And when such realisation of the non-duality of heaven and earth, even of non-being and being, will have been attained and assimilated, life joy will pour from all things as from an inexhaustible cup. Joseph Campbell from the Mythic Image. So this is the point at which we recognise that we always was I am. That we were never this, that none of this is but a dream. This is infinite consciousness's dream. Yeah. Well, don't you have strange dreams?
Beautiful and strange.
Yeah. And so what these beautiful people were doing with these images were giving us some very, very powerful insights. So all of these last cards, instead of being how we become perfect, they're showing this is how you'll live your life. Once you've recognised that you're the knower, which is the I am, then you're going to practice social justice. Then you're going to practice forgiveness as a constant way of being. Then you're going to practice being pure of heart. What's being pure of heart? Where you're invested in helping to raise the consciousness of humanity. That's pure in heart, because you see the divine in everyone and you commit your life to helping everybody else. That's what I'm doing here today, by the way. I'm getting to practice my being pure in heart by having you become familiar with these things and helping you to see that you could be approaching life with the knowing of who you really are, just by using a few full stops in my interpretation of it, in my version of it. And my last slide, I am an Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. I am is the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. Thank you for letting me share this today. I said to Sheila I was going to jump another level today in terms of where I was going with it. And so I appreciate you being here. And my sense is that most of you have heard what I've said and have grasped elements of that. Any questions or observations? Michael?
Just a question. It's a sort of a linguistic thing. Love on this side as the origin of suffering, one of those four.
Yep.
And then we speak of love on the other side as the spiritual, or the same word. I'm Greek, so I know
agape love.
Words.
Yeah.
But can I ask you just to try to differentiate the love that leads back into the world and the love that leads through the going to the source? Use the same word in English.
Yes, except so the love, agape love, is the love that's intrinsic to who you are. All the other loves are found outside of yourself.
Okay.
So all the other loves are about special relationships. Family, lover, friends, it's all external. The love, agape love, is the intrinsic love. Yeah, and it requires nobody else. But it actually incorporates everybody else, but doesn't require anybody else. Does that?
That's a good answer.
Oh, good. No, I've thought about it long and hard, and what it means. And I mean, let me make this practical. I mean, I live in a very unique relationship with somebody where that's the sort of relationship that we have. In that we do have love for each other, but there's no conditions of any kind set on that. Literally, if Rosie was to come to me today and was to say to me, I need to move on, I would go, oh, well, if there's anything I can do to support you, thank you for having been part of my journey. I just loved everything that we've had, and bless you on your journey. And that, without any reservation, would be how I would respond if she said, I need to go. Why? Because what my first and foremost love is my relationship with God. Now, when we went into relationship, I said that to her. I said, you have to understand that in this relationship, if you want to be in this relationship with me, I'm seeking to more fully, and I'm still seeking to more fully understand what that relationship of being at one with God is, and that type of love that's in there. I said, but that's what I'm committed to first and foremost. And you have to understand that our relationship comes second to that. And she said, I understand.
Just got a question on the part of the process of your inspiration, how you got there, if it involves also the path of Vedanta in Indian, and the work of Sri Ramana Maharshi, I am that, and yeah.
Yeah. You were saying that it's...
If has been...
Well, do you know, it's funny you asked that question. I don't know if you're familiar with English guy by the name of Rupert Spira. He's studied Vedanta and all of those for many, many years. Interesting man, and he certainly has been a huge inspiration in coming to this next level of understanding. If any of you have never seen his stuff, Rupert Spira, he's definitely worth listening to. He's got hundreds of YouTube videos, and he's just the most interesting English man who lives it, owns it, walks it, and he talks about the direct path, which is where I've got some of my own adaptions of what he's talking about with the full stops and the commas and stuff like that. But he just said, we don't need to be doing all this other stuff. We can actually make it quite simple. And what I've tried to highlight, and what I think these guys were telling us, is how we simplify it. Be the observer. Be the listener. Be the knower. And that takes us into being love. That's the natural extension of that. You don't actually have to discipline yourself to do it. It just becomes how you turn up and express yourself in the world.
What was his surname?
Rupert Spira, S-P-I-R-A. Thank you all for being such attentive listeners, and I look at you, I look at your eyes when I speak. I've been public speaking so long now that it's very easy for me to actually really look at what people are experiencing and doing, and I can see and hear that, and it's nice that I saw receptivity even to a newcomer who was, this is like off the planet for you probably what you've heard today, but there'll be some good conversations moving forward, I suspect. But yeah, but thank you, and thank you for giving me the place to be able to do it.